The first time I saw him cry, I wanted to set the whole damn town on fire. Not because I was angry at him, but because someone else had broken him, and I would have torn down every wall, every lie, every chain, just to see him breathe without pain again. It all started on a late summer evening in Willow Creek, a town that looked like it was pulled out of a postcard, but hid enough secrets to drown a man. I was sitting on the roof of my truck outside the diner, nursing a Coke and pretending not to watch him through the glass window. Everyone thought Ryan and Ethan were the dream couple, the type you'd find framed in the yearbook. What they didn't see were the shadows behind Ryan's grin, the bruises Ethan always covered, the fear that lingered in his eyes when Ryan's hand gripped his shoulder too tight. I should have said something earlier. I should have told Ethan how I felt, how I could see through Ryan's mask, how love isn't supposed to hurt. But instead, I stayed quiet, stuck in the role of best friend and silent guardian, swallowing my feelings and hoping Ethan would one day see the truth. That night, though, everything cracked wide open. I was halfway across the diner parking lot when I saw Ethan standing frozen at the counter, his knuckles white against the surface, while Ryan leaned in close to another boy at the far end of the room. Their laughter was sharp, intimate, wrong. Ryan's hand brushed against the boy's thigh under the table, and for a second, I thought Ethan would break right there in front of everyone. But he didn't. Ethan just smiled this hollow, broken smile and walked out as if nothing had happened. I followed him without thinking. "Ethan," I called, but he kept walking, down Main Street, past the shuttered shops and toward the river. His shoulders shook like he was carrying the weight of the whole world. When I finally caught up, he was standing on the pier, staring out at the water like it had answers written across its surface. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "Did you see it too?" he whispered. My chest tightened. "Yeah." That one word broke him. His knees buckled, and before I knew it, he was in my arms, trembling. I wanted to tell him right there, tell him I loved him, tell him he deserved so much better. But all I could do was hold him, feel his tears soak through my shirt, and pray I was enough to keep him from shattering. What neither of us knew then was that Ryan's betrayal was just the beginning. Because love wasn't the only dangerous thing in Willow Creek. The days that followed were like living inside a storm. Ethan pulled away from Ryan, but Ryan didn't take rejection lightly. He wasn't just a boy with a perfect smiley, he was the son of a man whose hands were in every dirty deal in town. From under-the-table real estate scams to whispered threats that kept people too afraid to speak. And Ryan, as it turned out, had inherited more than just his father's charm. It started small. Ryan showing up outside Ethan's house, leaning against his car with that smug grin. Then came the texts, hundreds of them, full of apologies that sounded more like warnings. And when Ethan stopped replying, Ryan turned cruel. "You think you can just walk away from me?" Ryan hissed one night when we were leaving the movie theater. He cornered Ethan against the brick wall, his hand pressing hard enough against his chest to leave marks. "You're mine, Hayes. Don't forget it." I stepped between them before Ethan could say a word. "He's not yours, Keller. He never was." Ryan's eyes flicked to me, sharp and calculating. For a second, I thought he'd hit me. Instead, he just smirked, leaned close enough that I could smell the whiskey on his breath, and said, "You think you can protect him? You don't know what you're getting into." He wasn't wrong, because the more I tried to pull Ethan away, the deeper Ryan's grip seemed to tighten. There were nights when Ethan would sneak into my room through the window, his hands shaking, his eyes haunted, whispering about the threats Ryan made, the promises of what he'd do if Ethan didn't come back. I should have gone to the police. But in Willow Creek, the police worked for Keller's father. Everyone did. It left me with one choice, to fight for Ethan myself, even if it meant risking everything. But the hardest part wasn't Ryan, or his father's empire, or the shadows that seemed to close in tighter every day. The hardest part was Ethan himself. He was fragile, torn between fear and hope, guilt and longing. Sometimes, in the quiet moments like when we sat on the hood of my truck by the river, the stars scattered above us look at me with this softness that made my heart ache. He'd lean just a little too close, his hand brushing mine, as if he wanted to fall but didn't know if I'd catch him. One night, when the air was thick with the sound of crickets, he finally asked, Why are you doing this, Jake? Why are you always here? I swallowed hard, my throat burning with words I'd been holding back for years. Because I can't stand to see you hurt. Because you matter to me more than anything. His eyes searched mine, wide and uncertain. You mean, more than friends? I nodded, terrified of what he might say. For a moment the world stopped. Then he leaned forward, closing the distance between us, his lips brushing mine like a secret. Soft, hesitant, real. When we pulled apart, he whispered, I'm scared. So am I admitted. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. That was the moment everything changed. But love didn't erase the danger. Ryan wasn't done, and neither was his father. The more Ethan and I clung to each other, the more desperate Ryan became to pull him back. And soon it wasn't just threats. It was violence, broken glass, fistfights in dark alleys, warnings scratched into the hood of my truck. And yet, through it all, Ethan and I grew stronger. Our love wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a rebellion, promise, a lifeline. Even when the town turned its back, even when it felt like the whole world was against us, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would never let him go. Not again. Ethan's kiss lingered on my lips long after the stars had shifted above us. It wasn't the kind of kiss you give out of impulse or boredom. It was the kind that carried years of silence, of stolen glances, of aching loneliness. It was also the kind that made promises too fragile to be spoken aloud. But love, as sweet as it was, didn't change reality. The very next morning, I found Ryan leaning against Ethan's locker at school, his eyes darker than I'd ever seen. He smiled when he saw me, but it wasn't a smile meant for friends. It was a warning. Morning haze, he said smoothly, his voice echoing through the hallway. You didn't answer my calls last night. Ethan froze. His hand tightened around his books, his knuckles white. I stepped closer. Back off, Keller. Ryan's gaze flicked to me, unbothered. Interesting. Since when do you speak for him? Since he stopped wanting you around. Gasps rippled down the hall, whispers buzzing like flies. Everyone loved drama in Willow Creek, and this was better than anything on Netflix. But this wasn't entertainment for Ethan. His chest rose and fell too quickly, his eyes darting to the floor as if wishing the ground would swallow him whole. Ryan leaned forward, his voice low but sharp enough for me to hear. Careful, Jake. You're stepping into things you don't understand. Then, just like that, he walked away. But the damage was done. That night, Ethan climbed into my truck after work. He didn't speak at first. He just sat there, staring out the windshield, his hands trembling against his jeans. Ethan, I said softly, you don't have to explain anything. Just talk to me. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. Ryan's not just a jealous ex, Jake. You don't get it. His dad owns half the businesses in town. The cops, the school board, even the damn pastor, they all answer to him. If Ryan says jump, this town jumps. I frowned. So what? That doesn't give him the right to hurt you. He turned to me then, his eyes glassy. You don't understand. If I push too hard, if I make him angry, it's not just me who pays. Something twisted in my chest. What do you mean? His voice cracked. He threatened my mom. I slammed my palm against the steering wheel, anger coursing through me. That son of a, Jake. Ethan cut in, gripping my arm. Please, don't make this worse. I looked at him, at the fear trembling in his hazel eyes, and felt my anger collapse under the weight of it. All I wanted was to keep him safe, but how could I fight someone who had the whole damn town in his pocket? Still, one truth burned brighter than my fear. I wasn't going to let Ethan face this alone. The following week was a blur of tension. Ryan hovered in the background of everything: hallways, football games, even church on Sunday morning. He was everywhere Ethan was, and though he didn't always speak, his presence was enough to keep Ethan on edge. But there were also moments of light, like when we drove out to the edge of town, parking by the abandoned train tracks where no one bothered to look for us. Ethan would lean against me, his head resting on my shoulder, and for a few hours we were just two boys falling in love, not prisoners of some twisted game. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, he whispered, "Do you ever wish things were different? That we could just be normal?" I kissed the top of his hair. "Every damn day." He was quiet for a while before murmuring, "Sometimes I wonder if love is supposed to hurt this much." My chest ached. "Real love doesn't hurt, Ethan. Ryan was never love." I brushed my fingers against his, threading them together. "This is." But happiness was short-lived. 2 nights later, someone slashed the tires on my truck. The message was clear, scrawled across the hood in red spray paint. "Stay away." I found Ethan pacing outside my house when I got home, his face pale under the porch light. "This is my fault," he said. "No," I snapped. "This is Ryan. And I'm not scared of him." But the truth? I was scared. Not for me, for Ethan. Because if Ryan was willing to go this far just to scare me, what else was he capable of? The breaking point came on a Friday night after the football game. The entire town had crowded into the field, the air thick with cheers and the smell of hot dogs. Ryan was the star quarterback, and even though I hated him, I couldn't deny he had the crowd wrapped around his finger. Ethan sat beside me in the bleachers, trying to disappear into his hoodie. He hadn't wanted to come, but I'd convinced him it would be safe in a crowd. I was wrong. After the game, as people spilled out onto the field, Ryan found us. He was flushed from victory, sweat dripping down his temples, but his smile was venom. "Hayes," he drawled. "Care to congratulate me?" Ethan shook his head. "Leave me alone, Ryan." The crowd's noise dimmed around us, as if everyone knew a storm was coming. Ryan's hand shot out, gripping Ethan's wrist tight enough to make him wince. "You think you can walk away from me? You think Ryan's eyes cut to me, can protect you?" I shoved him back. "Don't touch him." For a second, I thought Ryan would swing at me, but instead he smiled, slow and cruel. "Fine, have it your way. But don't say I didn't warn you." He walked off, but the promise in his voice clung to me like smoke. That night, Ethan and I didn't sleep. We sat on my porch, the cicadas humming around us, our hands tangled together. He was shaking, his fear palpable. "I can't keep doing this, Jake," he whispered. "I can't keep waiting for the next threat, the next fight. He'll never let me go." "Yes, he will," I said firmly. "We'll make him." Ethan's eyes lifted to mine, searching. "How?" I didn't have an answer. But I knew one thing. I'd burn this whole town down before I let Ryan break him again. The first real plan came to me the next day. We couldn't rely on the cops, the school, or anyone tied to Ryan's family. But there was one person who might help Mr. Lawson, the old journalist who ran the town's dying newspaper. He'd spent years exposing Keller's shady deals, though most people brushed him off as a bitter drunk. But if anyone had dirt on Ryan's family, it was him. When I told Ethan, his eyes widened. "You think he'd actually help us?" "He hates the Kellers more than anyone. If we give him a reason, yeah, I think he will." Ethan bit his lip. "And if Ryan finds out?" I squeezed his hand. "Then we fight harder." We drove out to Mr. Lawson's house that evening. It was a creaky old place on the edge of town, filled with stacks of yellowed newspapers and the smell of whiskey. He looked at us with suspicion when we explained, but when I told him what Ryan had been doing to Ethan, something sharp flickered in his tired eyes. "You boys are braver than you realize," he muttered. "But you're also in over your heads. The Kellers don't play fair." "We know," I said, "but someone has to stop him." Mr. Lawson leaned back, studying us. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, I'll help. But you need to be prepared for what comes next. Once we start this, there's no going back." I glanced at Ethan. His hand trembled in mine, but he nodded. "We're ready." For the first time in weeks, I saw a spark of hope in his eyes. And that was how it began. Not just a fight for love, but a fight for freedom. Mr. Lawson wasn't the kind of man people trusted anymore. Years of chasing stories no one wanted to hear had left him bitter, gray-haired, and half forgotten by a town that adored the Kellers. But when he pulled out a battered box from the back of his office closet and set it on the desk between us, I knew we weren't just chasing rumors. We were stepping into something that could blow Willow Creek wide open. Inside the box were folders, photographs, receipts, and letters evidence collected over years. Property fraud, bribery, blackmail, and tucked near the bottom, newspaper clippings about accidents no one had dared to question. Ethan's hands shook as he flipped through the files. This is enough to bury them. Mr. Lawson lit a cigarette, smoke curling around his face. It should be, but the truth isn't enough if no one's willing to listen. The Kellers have silenced plenty before. My jaw tightened. Then we don't let them silence us. Ethan's eyes met mine across the desk, his fear warring with a spark of something stronger. Hope. The next days were a blur of whispered meetings, secret photocopies, and stolen moments. Ethan and I spent hours locked away in Mr. Lawson's office, piecing together the puzzle of the Keller empire. The more we uncovered, the clearer it became. Ryan's threats weren't just teenage jealousy. They were part of a system built on control, intimidation, and fear. But the closer we got, the more dangerous it became. One evening, as Ethan and I were leaving the office, headlights flared behind us. A black car crawled along the curb, following us block for block. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, my pulse pounding. "Jake," Ethan whispered, panic in his voice. "I see them," I muttered, forcing my truck to stay steady even as the car sped up. For 3 streets, they tailed us, close enough that I could see the outline of 2 men inside. Finally, at a red light, they pulled up alongside us. The window rolled down, and a voice called out low and mocking. "Pretty late to be out, boys." Ethan froze. I didn't even look at them. I slammed my foot on the gas and ran the light, tires screeching against the asphalt. My heart hammered as we tore through back roads, zigzagging until the car finally disappeared. When we pulled over, Ethan was trembling, his hands clutching his knees. "They know, Jake. They know we're digging." I reached over, forcing him to meet my eyes. "Then we can't stop. If we stop now, they win. And I'm not letting them win." His voice broke. "You could get hurt. I'd take every hit if it means keeping you safe." He didn't answer. He just leaned forward, pressed his forehead against mine, and whispered, "Then we do this together." Ryan's presence only grew more suffocating after that. He cornered Ethan in the hallways, smirked across classrooms, left notes in his locker that said things like "You belong to me." But Ethan had changed. Instead of shrinking, he started standing taller. He had me, and he had a reason to fight. One night, sitting on the hood of my truck, Ethan finally said it out loud. "Jake, I'm in love with you." The world stilled. My chest felt too full, my throat too tight. I cupped his face, kissed him hard, and whispered, "I've been in love with you for years." The moment should have been perfect. But love doesn't erase danger, it just makes the stakes higher. Mr. Lawson finally gave us the plan. We release everything at once. Copies to the state press, to the mayor's office, to every contact I've still got left. Enough noise that the Kellers can't bury it all. Ethan frowned. "And if they come after us before that?" Lawson exhaled smoke. "Then you run. Far and fast." But Ethan shook his head, his voice steady. "I'm done running." The night we decided to act was colder than usual. The town felt tense, like it knew something was about to break. Ethan and I sat together on the pier, the water black and endless beneath us. "Jake," he whispered, "what if this doesn't work?" I laced my fingers through his. "Then we still have each other. That's enough." He leaned against me, silent for a long time. Then, softly, "You're my safe place." My chest burned with the weight of it. But safety was short-lived. The next day, Ryan cornered us in the parking lot. His smile was gone, his eyes wild. "I told you to stay away, Hayes. And you..." He shoved me hard against my truck. "You don't know what you've started." Before I could react, 2 men stepped out from behind him, bigger, older, faces like stone. Hired muscle. Ethan's hand tightened around mine, and for the first time, I wasn't just scared. I was furious. "Back off, Ryan," I growled. Ryan leaned close, his breath hot with rage. You think you can take me down? You're nothing, Jake. And Ethan, his voice dropped lower, Ethan is mine. He'll always be mine. Ethan's voice rang out, sharp and steady. I'm not yours. I was never yours. For a moment, Ryan froze, his mask cracking. Then he snarled, lunging forward. The fight that followed was messy, brutal, desperate. Fists flew, shouts echoed, and for a moment I thought we'd both end up broken on the asphalt. But even through the chaos, I felt Ethan beside me, holding his ground, refusing to cower. When the headlights of another car swept across the lot, Ryan and his men scattered into the shadows. But his words lingered like poison. This isn't over. That night, Ethan and I didn't sleep. We sat together in my room, bruised and aching, but alive. Jake, he whispered, his voice trembling. What if they kill us? I pulled him against my chest, kissing his hair. Then we die fighting, but we don't give up. Not now. His tears soaked my shirt, but he nodded. And for the first time, I knew we weren't just surviving anymore. We were ready to burn the whole damn empire down. If loving him was a crime, I would have confessed in front of the whole courtroom. If keeping him alive meant burning everything I owned to ashes, I would have watched the flames lick my hands without blinking. The final act didn't begin with a bang. It began with an email. Mr. Lawson, bless him, had worked fast and messily, had friends in low places and a conscience that refused to rest. The files we'd handed him went out that morning in a single, unignorable blast. Copies to state papers, an investigative reporter in the city, the district attorney, and a handful of journalists with teeth. We'd balanced on a knife edge and decided to jump. For hours, Willow Creek hummed like an anthill that had been poked. Phones rang, doors closed, and people who pretended not to know anything suddenly remembered having opinions. The Keller name flashed across a regional news site by noon, accompanied by the kind of headline that makes people who've been scared decide it's finally safe to speak. The town's cozy illusion cracked. For the first time, the Kellers had to answer to someone who didn't owe them anything. But power didn't fold quietly. If anything, it slammed harder. Ryan's calm persona fractured into something like panic. He stopped smiling at the games and started watching Ethan with eyes that measured and weighed like a man planning how to silencing a candle. His father called late that night, his voice smooth and dangerous, weaving promises and threats into the same sentence. This will go away, he said. You know what will happen if it doesn't. Ethan sat in the dark of my room while the phone buzzed its last lie into the line. He was hollowed out by terror and relief in the same breath. They can't touch us, Jake, he whispered. Not now. Not if they're already exposed. We'll make sure they can't, I said. The conviction in my voice was part bluff, part need. We had to stand like we believed the truth could change things. The next week was a war fought at 1,000 small fronts. The district attorney's office called for interviews. Mr. Lawson was suddenly not a drunk but a witness with a dossier. The state reporter came down with a camera crew and a seriousness that smelled like finality. People who had been too scared to speak came forward, quiet neighbors. A former employee with a ledger. A woman who had been pushed out of a real estate deal. Each piece fit into a map of corruption that made the Kellers look human-sized and therefore defeatable. And yet Ryan remained dangerous because he had a personal stake. He started showing up where Ethan worked, whispered apologies that tasted like knives, and left bruises disguised as clumsy hugs. One night, he waited in the alley behind the diner and tried to drag Ethan to his car. This time, Ethan did not go. He pulled free and, with a face that had finally learned to be honest in the face of fear, shoved Ryan away and called names I'd never heard him use. The men who worked for Ryan stood by, glowering and impotent while the town watched. We were not naive enough to think the town would turn on Ryan in a single week, but the tide had shifted. Folks who had nodded at Keller parties no longer laughed as loud. A handful of friends unexpected. Ordinary people showed up at Mr. Lawson's little office to sign statements. The moral cost of continuing the Kellers' protective silence grew heavier each day. Still, the Kellers struck back. The first real retaliation came at dawn when someone set fire to the back barn of a woman who had signed an affidavit. It was hate and warning braided together. Someone wanted to terrify witnesses into silence. The county sheriff, one whose straps used to gleam with Keller generosity, came by with a perfunctory sympathy and promises that sounded like excuses. The arson brought a new fear into Ethan's eyes. Older now, older than his years, and I felt something break loose inside me that was not fear either. It was fury. "You should leave," Ethan said one morning, voice small with a respect for my life I didn't feel like I deserved. "You don't have to do this. Leave," I repeated, because there was no room in my chest for the thought of leaving him. "And go where? Hide? Forget you?" He looked at me like I'd painted the answer on my skin. "I don't want you to die because of me." "You won't lose me," I said simply. "Not now." The words were not bravado. They were a promise that felt as inevitable as breathing. The court case began like a cold dawn. The town hall smelled like old varnish and new nerves. Reports and testimony filled the room. The state reporter's articles made the Kellers' wealth look like a theater set propped up on lies. Ryan's father paced, pale and furious, his hands betraying the tremor beneath the suit. Ryan himself sat rigid, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the white of it. He was terrified in a way I'd never witnessed, like a man who could not understand that his illusions were now public property. We expected Ryan to deny everything. We expected the Kellers to lawyer up, to try to bury evidence with money and pressure. What we did not expect was Ryan to break. During cross-examination, when the reporter asked about all the times people had seen him with Ethan and others, he faltered, then snapped, then finally, battered by facts, told a version of the truth that made the room shift. He admitted to threats, to intimidation, to the ugly things he'd done to keep Ethan under him. He blamed his father for most of it, but his voice carried his own weight of responsibility. It was devastating and necessary. The admission did what every secret loves must: it destroyed itself under the light it did not expect. People gasped. Some parents clutched their children as if to protect them from the reality they'd preferred to ignore. Ryan left the hall under a cluster of delighted and furious glances, his future suddenly uncertain and palpably smaller than the present. His father wasn't as quick to fall. He fought, threatened, and tried to buy silence, but the net of witnesses tightened. County investigators, prompted by state attention, began to untangle deals that had looked impossible to dissect. The sheriff's office, hoisted into action by the weight of public attention, arrested a figure indicted on charges beyond small-town bribery, and with each cuff that clicked shut, the Kellers' aura of untouchability dimmed. Through it all, Ethan and I clung to each other like survivors after a storm. We had moments that belonged only to a Spitza on the roof of my truck, hands warming each other in winter cold, clumsy dances in my dim kitchen when we watched old movies to summon normalcy. There were tears, late-night confessions about what we'd missed while we were silent, and small triumphs like Ethan laughing until he hiccuped. Healing was not a sudden thing. It was a slow mending because we chose to show up for each other every day. Ryan's fall did not make everything right. People had been hurt in ways that could not be fixed by papers or courtroom speeches. Some of the Kellers' allies buried themselves so deep in shame they left town quietly, their reputations in tatters. Others, resentful and angry, burned bridges and friendships to ash. But one thing changed irrevocably. The town could no longer pretend fear was the currency that bought consent. The morning after the final hearing, when the judge read a sentence that made the Kellers' power feel like a bruise rather than a brand, Ethan and I walked the riverbank in silence. The sky was a washed-out blue and the cranes along the old mill moved in slow, patient circles. He stopped and took my hands, his palms calloused from the small jobs he'd taken to help his mother through the weeks of uncertainty. "You did the bravest thing I've ever seen," he said, voice raw. "All of this, because you loved me." "You did it too," I answered. "You chose yourself. You chose us." He laughed a small, incredulous sound, and then he kissed me like he meant to remember every inch of me. There was no drama in the kiss, no urgency to prove anything. It was simply us, safe in the knowledge that fear could be fought. We stayed in Willow Creek for a while after. Change doesn't happen overnight, and not everyone forgave us for exposing the ugliness that sat beneath their comfortable lives. But more people reached out than I'd expected. A few teachers who had been quietly watching came forward with apologies and support. The diner owner, who'd once looked away, slipped us 2 free pies with a shy smile and an offer of a reference to a friend in the city. Mr. Lawson, who had weathered scoffs and threats, smoked his cigarette with a little more pride in his stride. Months later, on a bright and ordinary morning, Ethan and I stood together in a small apartment 3 towns over. We didn't flee so much as choose a new map to draw on. We had enough money saved, scraps of overtime, an inheritance Ethan's mother used to help, and a promise to try living where the past had less bite. The move was not a grand escape. It was practical, tender, and full of cardboard boxes that smelled like new beginnings. We learned the slow work of ordinary life. Grocery lists, rent due dates, waking up side by side and reaching for one another before the alarm. We learned how to argue without building cathedrals of resentment, how to say I'm sorry and mean it, and how to hold each other through moments when the past flared up in nightmares. We went to therapy together and separately because love can be a shelter but sometimes needs architects. Years later, when people asked about the scandal that had once eaten the town headlines, we told them the short version. That truth had a way of finding voices when it had been silent too long. We told them about the courage of quiet people, about the cost of courage, and about how 2 boys who had once been trapped by fear learned to build a life where fear didn't rule them. On warm evenings we returned to Willow Creek sometimes, not as fugitives but as visitors. The pier still creaked when the river rolled under it, the same old stars stitched into the sky. We'd sit and talk about the future we'd chosen, kids maybe, somewhere down the line, or a life of small adventures, and sometimes we'd watch the town lights and remember how fragile things once were. We never forgot. We honored the people who'd risked themselves to speak the truth. We honored the losses with quiet donations and visits to those who needed help rebuilding. If there is a moral in the mess of it all, maybe it is simply this: love is the kind of stubborn light that can force open a door even when the hinges have rusted for years. It isn't always loud. Often it is the small, steady work of showing up. It is telling the truth when it is easier to look away. It is holding someone's hand when the world asks you to let go. Ethan and I were not made by the moments of violence or by the courthouse's fluorescent lights. We were made by the plain, persistent choices we made afterward, by setting the table for 2 every night, by learning each other's scars, by laughing until our sides hurt. We survived because we chose one another and kept choosing each other when the easier thing was to run. On our first anniversary in the apartment, I cooked a messy meal and we burned the garlic because that's how beginnings often go. He laughed and I laughed with him, and for the first time in a long while, the sound felt like a promise rather than a fragile reprieve. We sat at our small table, hands linked, and in the quiet between bites he said, "We did it. We did. We burned nothing down that wasn't already rotten, and we planted things where the soil still had life. We loved each other fiercely, recklessly, and tenderly, and that was enough." Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.